Welcome back, everyone, to the summit. Hopefully you had a great lunch break, an opportunity to refresh, have your coffee in front of you and your drinks. We have 2 sessions remaining today. Prior to lunch, we had fantastic sessions that focused on 2 enablers of being able to look at how we create change to address health inequalities. And we heard about our first barrier about digital health and technology, and what's necessary to transform healthcare as a whole, including a shift to more value-based care. Now, let's shift our focus to healthcare infrastructure. I think we can all agree that the COVID pandemic put a spotlight on the challenges required to get vaccines to everyone around the world. What did we learn from this massive undertaking? Let's find out in a panel titled The Last Mile to Healthcare, Reimagining Supply Chains. Before I pass things over, just wanted to remind you to submit your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We've had some fantastic questions throughout the sessions. Keep them coming. Now, I'd like to introduce Brett Marshall, Corporate Head, Quality Assurance and HSSE at Zuellig Pharma, who's going to take us into this deep dive on this topic.
Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening or good morning, wherever you may be. We're going to be talking this afternoon on the importance of supply chain to healthcare access for patients. Certainly, supply chain infrastructure plays an integral role in the delivery of products and services to patients and the utility of the provision of those services and products. So, accessibility and also the quality and safety of the medicines for patients. In the case of COVID-19, one of the things that we saw was that the more mature markets were able to gain access to vaccines earlier than some of their emerging partners or country markets. Also, as we've seen, the evolving importance of supply chain to sustainability. And so the investments that we're making in infrastructure and systems and processes is also influenced by our desire to build the security of product storage and delivery, and at the same time reduce our carbon footprint. So what we're going to be talking today about is the evolving supply chain infrastructure and network capabilities, particularly around Asia. I'm joined today by esteemed panellists, and I'm very excited to have the team here today. So we have Mr. Chung Ming, who is the Executive Director for Transport and Logistics for Enterprise Singapore. So Chung Ming works with companies in logistics, e-commerce, supply chain technology to develop capabilities and catalyse local and international partnerships. Welcome, Chung Ming.
Thank you, Brett.
We also have online Alexandra Riha, who is the Regional Supply Chain Network Operations for Asia Pacific for Merck Healthcare. And Alex has over 25 years of end-to-end supply chain experience in the pharmaceutical industry on all levels, locally, regionally and globally. And she's also served as the president and board chairperson of the Australasian Supply Chain Institute from 2019 to February 22. So welcome, Alex. We have Ishita Damani, who is the partner for life science and health leader supply chain competency for ASEAN for Ernst & Young. And Ishita is a business leader, entrepreneur and mother, and she has over 17 years of experience in transforming global operations and leads the supply chain competency for Ernst & Young in ASEAN, with a deeper focus on life science and healthcare sectors. Welcome, Ishita.
Thank you.
And beside me, Chris Cave-Jones, who is the Regional Director for Argon & Co. Chris leads the consulting practice in Southeast Asia for Argon & Co. and has a deep knowledge and experience of supply chain functions across multiple consumer products industries and across Europe, Asia, Latin America and South Africa. So I think, welcome Chris.
Thank you.
And we'll get into our discussion. And I think one of the things that we saw arising from the COVID and pandemic period was certainly the evolution of increasing temperature control demands for handling of products, ready accessibility to PPE, and across the markets, particularly in Asia, having access to not just the major cities but also the provincial areas as well was quite important. So this was important also for product integrity and patient safety as key areas of focus. Quality governance for compliance to international guidelines and for good manufacturing, good distribution practices is also essential. Ishita, if I may ask, what are your thoughts on the evolving supply chains and their capabilities, and are there any key focus areas for stakeholders now and for the future?
Thank you. I think that's a great way to start the panel, actually. It's been an interesting few years for supply chain, right? With the pandemic, I think everybody went into a shock. We had major challenges with supply. We had major challenges with hospitals not being able to look after patients, PPE, almost everything was a shortage, right from toilet paper to the most critical medication. So I think one lesson that supply chains have learned is on resilience. And that sort of manifests itself multifold in the way we manage supply chains today. So first and foremost, right, supply chains were very linear. I think people have realized now that they are networked ecosystems with multiple parties interdependent on each other. And what was focused on cost and sort of really making lean and simpler supply chains has now become focused on dealing with volatility and demand fluctuations, as well as making sure that patient access and patient care is possible at almost every cost, right? So that essentially means that supply chains now use more technology. There's a greater say for supply chain professionals at the table. And there's that mix of data, traceability, visibility to ensure that we have a resilient ecosystem that can thrive. Other changes, sort of downstream effects around dependence on a wider base of suppliers. So more and more companies, healthcare systems are now leveraging suppliers overseas as well as locally, ensuring they have alternate supply chains available for the same product. Second thing. Third aspect, which I think is very important and very pertinent to this part of the world, is around moving to more service-based contracts. So if you think from a supply chain perspective, suddenly there's more hospitals in the ASEAN market. We saw new facilities come up for vaccine distribution. We also heard stories of waste, vaccine expiries, and that has paved way to a realization that maybe vendor-based, vendor-managed inventory, maybe service-oriented contracts for our radiology labs could be the next step in more efficient managing of the health ecosystem. And that is changing the dynamics in which the supply chain, the contracting, the relationships between the health service providers as well as the manufacturers work in this part of the world. And finally, I would add on that infrastructure improvement has been a significant upside that has come out of COVID. You know, if some good comes out of everything that's not so great, we have seen more cold chain investment happen in this region. We have seen more acceptance for high value, high quality, high price drugs, which is going to increase access, and it's going to make sure that patients in this part of the world have better access to the innovative therapies that are coming out in future. So that's what I would add on.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ishita. Chris, Ishita talked about infrastructure and improved capabilities. How do you see healthcare supply chain models by comparison with what you've seen in some of the other industries that you look at?
Well, I think the innovation generally in the life sciences industry has obviously been in product development. That's where the key focus has been made, and quite rightly too, because medicines have to be targeted at curing illness. But in recent years, the supply chain has itself had to become more innovative to keep the flow of products moving. Now, many other industries have been suffering or coping with supply chain pressures for a long time. If we think about consumer electronics, we think about consumer products, we think about chemicals industry, for example, having the product available to the consumer at the point when they need it is critically important, because the consumer has a choice. If it's not there, they can choose someone else's product. You can't always do that with a medicine. Sometimes you can. You can choose a generic, and hence supply chain is becoming more important. So I think the impact of supply chain management is becoming more, and I completely agree with the point that the role of the supply chain professional inside the life sciences company is rising, and the profile is rising, and the need for supply chain expertise is rising. I mean, just a few examples. In the consumer goods industry, you take someone like ice cream vendors, even in the most remote kampong in deepest Indonesia or Malaysia, you've always got a little warung that has a freezer in it, which has got Nestle ice cream in it, it's got Unilever ice cream in it, and they've managed that distribution of their products right down to the village level. And I think life sciences could follow that and basically put in the infrastructure that is needed to support the complete supply chain all the way to the end. I think another example is on the reordering process. A lot of innovation going on now in other companies where we give technology to the end distributor or retailer. And even in very rural settings, everybody has smartphones now. You can give them an app which actually allows them to manage their inventory, manage the reordering process, and then the orders get consolidated by a distributor and delivered the next day. And these sort of innovations have come through necessity, through competition in the market. And I would just add one more issue, that it's about predicting demand and understanding what the demand is going to be, so that on the supply chain side we can get ready to fulfill that demand. But we need to remove some of these kind of demand distortions that take place. If you take the example of HIV patients, unfortunately once someone gets HIV, they're going to be on drugs for a lifetime, and it's very predictable what drugs they're going to need and when they're going to need to take them. And so if you can track the number of people who have HIV in any given market, then the demand for the HIV drug should be 100% predictable. Unfortunately, the way they get ordered by the different authorities is not predictable, and they tend to store up the orders and then issue a large order, which introduces a big distortion in the supply chain. So there's room for the whole supply chain to collaborate, from the producer all the way through to the healthcare providers and orderers, to get a smoother flow and more predictable response in the supply chain.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. I want to perhaps focus a little more on the safety aspect, and you talked about how we expand infrastructure into provincial areas and cold chain management. And I'd like to ask Alex your thoughts on focus areas for ensuring safe and accessible supply of healthcare products to hospitals, medical centres, pharmacies and patients in those remote areas.
Yeah, I want to start perhaps with a study or with data from the WHO dated 2017 that almost 50% of the vaccines have been destroyed because they were wasted in transportation. So that's really a big number. That was 2017, and I'm convinced much more happened since. So the difficulty is really that talking about highly sophisticated drugs, they need very validated transportations. So and more temperature controls are needed. If we just think of our vaccines, I think everybody has still our COVID vaccines in mind. When they had to be transported with -80 and -60 degrees in a freezer, and then once they thawed in the fridge, it was around 5 days for usage. So that was a big challenge for the whole community. It was a challenge for the manufacturers, but it was also a challenge across the whole chain to get the product safely in good condition in its entire integrity to our patients. And whenever we have a temperature deviation, it compromises the product. And there's a good practice. We don't use this. It's really it has to be monitored end to end, especially for the biologics. That will be even more critical. And I believe we will have to work more in innovation of packaging materials. It's the first mile, but also in the last mile, to make it really faster, better, reasonable, not as bulky, and also clearly environmentally friendly. Just to comply, and I think that's a fascinating part, what we are just heading towards. Because wonderful products or heavily needed products, highly sophisticated medicines need to reach the patients, and we should really avoid any waste in between.
Fantastic, thank you, Alex. We talked about vaccines, and one of the things that when we were first dealing with the pandemic, the greatest area of focus on supply chain was potentially the need to have thousands of 747 freighters moving vaccines from manufacturing sites around the globe. That didn't actually happen, and the main reason that it didn't happen was because there was much more pressure upstream in terms of the manufacturing capacities, the availability of raw materials, the availability of packaging supplies and packaging components for those vaccines. One of the things that I think we can talk about is how Asia positions itself more effectively to deal with potential shortfalls or potential challenges to access. And certainly we would need to look at the manufacturing capabilities of the countries in Asia. And Chung Ming, I'd like to ask you in particular how Singapore has observed the developments of evolving manufacturing requirements and global medicine supplies and production capabilities, and some of the steps that Singapore has taken to strengthen its position in the healthcare supply chain.
Thank you, Brett. Good afternoon. I think, as we all know, Singapore is a major trade and connectivity hub in Asia. We enable many global trade flows through Singapore, not just enabling trade within Asia, but across Europe, across the Americas as well. So for supply chain, definitely we want to continue to innovate and to invest. And many of us know that Singapore will be investing a lot of resources into building our new airport and our new seaport at Tuas and Changi T5 respectively. Now, and at the same time, we are also building up a very vibrant life sciences cluster in Singapore. And post-COVID, we are seeing lots more interest from global producers, global life sciences companies to actually locate their production in Asia. And I think one of the key reasons for that is to, in a way, shorten their supply chain to Asia, right? And also to have more quicker access to the demand markets, and as well to have more resilience in the overall supply chain. So I totally agree, Ishida, that resilience is a key thing that global companies will be looking at from now on. So I like to use the word moving from just in time to just in case. And not only your global your production have to be near to the customer, but at the same time, you may need to set up supply chain hubs or regional distribution centers nearer to the markets. And that's where I think from Singapore perspective, we want to play a role in that. And to respond to that question, I think I would like to propose a 3C approach. First of all, is connectivity. I think Singapore is one of the most connected hubs in Asia, whether by air or by sea. Certainly, we can play a role to connect between the producers and the consumers. And that is a role that we have been playing for many years. And moving forward with the new investments coming in and with greater interest in building supply chain resilience and closer to the end user markets, we are seeing that Singapore will be able to play a more important role in this function. Second, I think we look at what we call intermodal supply chains. In Asia, it is not a contiguous landmass. There are many islands, there are many countries, many jurisdictions. One modality solution will not fit all. I'm sure Ishida and Chris will agree. Increasingly, we are seeing a lot of interest in intermodal, whether is it air land, sea land, or even air sea. And I think Singapore is a good position to leverage on these new modalities to offer very innovative, interesting, and resilient type of supply chain to the shippers or to the end consumers. And at the same time, I think with our experience in the COVID pandemic, whether is it to service our own domestic market, but I would also like to add at the same time, our connectivity, our infrastructure, and our know-how and solutioning was also used to support our neighbors, you know, whether is it in Asia or even further within. Yeah. Let me give you an example. We actually received a call for help to get more test kits and PPEs into certain markets that is in Latin America. And they had a problem structuring the solutioning because most of this actually came out from Asian factories. And they were looking around for viable and yet timely and cost-effective solutions. And I'm very happy to say that Singapore companies step up to the challenge, and we managed to actually structure and implemented a supply chain solution for them. The second C is on collaboration and community. And I think the community in Singapore, whether is it from our airlines, airport, air freight forwarders, or even other services providers, all step up in the COVID pandemic to help. And I would say that they had already invested somehow in solutions like Coolport by SATS in Changi Airport, and Dinata and SATS also implemented Cool Dollies. Yeah. And that's where I think Alex spoke about the danger and the risk of broken supply chains in pharma, and that's very important to have an impact and unbroken chain. And I think we had the infrastructure in place, and they were all collaborating. And Changi also step up as part of Pharma Aero to bring together like-minded airports and stakeholders to actually facilitate the supply chain for vaccines and medications for countries around the region. The third, I would say, is creativity, and that's where we spoke about innovation. So with the increased focus on sustainability and resilience, and also what Alex mentioned about new materials, new packaging, I think the ecosystem need to come together and work together on innovation. I'm very glad to say that at Enterprise Singapore, we are a very strong proponent of innovation. We want to encourage more of that happening in Singapore, working with like-minded partners. And we actually launched our Trade and Connectivity Challenge a couple of years ago, and we are seeing a lot of traction in that. And we welcome Life Sciences cluster to work with us to look at how can we have a more innovative, cost-efficient, and resilient ecosystem to support the growing focus on life sciences as well as resilient supply chain. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, Chung Ming. Chris, your thoughts on how we balance global and regional supply chain capabilities for timely access of products for patients in the future?
Well, this is some fairly classic supply chain issues here, I think, in terms of balancing supply and demand. And I think as supply chain professionals, the key thing to focus on is availability of the product. There are separate commercial decisions about prioritization and which markets they want to penetrate, but we need to make the product available so the patients can have it. Now, in terms of that, it becomes very important to actually get visibility of what the demand is. And there are innovative ways that people are trying to do that. For example, in the pandemic that we've just had, it was fairly clear that one of the predictors of the level of the pandemic was the amount of travel that was going on. So one of our clients was able to model and collect data from various different travel portals on the travel of people around the globe, whether it's air or road. And they were able to show that there was about a 5-week lag, that once you saw a spike in travel, you would see a spike in COVID, and therefore were able to predict what the need was for the COVID materials. So the way that the global supply chain operates is we have to start to get better at understanding what the demand drivers are, predicting what the demand is going to be, and then being able to fulfill the demand. Now, whether that's, as we just decided, that means building factories closer to the point of need to shorten the supply chain, whether it's about supply chain resilience and having alternative supplies so that if one supply goes down because of whatever reason, disasters, earthquakes, or simply COVID has locked down the distribution center, we need to have other pre-approved channels to go through. And that's very important because every product has to be licensed and approved in this kind of market. So these are all the sort of challenges that everybody is grappling with. But then at the end of the day, you have to have a well-managed sales and operations planning process operating behind the scenes that balances supply with demand and optimizes all your supply chain assets across the network in order to get the product to the point where it's needed at the best availability and at the best cost.
Brett and Chris, could I add on this point? I think you mentioned a lot about visibility. I think one of the challenges that we are grappling in the supply chain ecosystem, regardless of whether it's life sciences, electronics, or even lifestyle products, is the issue of data.
Yeah.
I think today, most of us have actually basic digitalization of this, but the digitalization mainly happens within the company. And when you talk about company to company or even within the whole value chain or supply chain, I don't think we are there yet.
No.
So I think data exchange and data sharing is an important part, especially for the life sciences supply chain. Because where you're talking about temperatures, disruptions, you're talking about timeliness, safety. So I would say that, that point about the data sharing and data exchange is very important. I think more discussions and more work need to be put into this point, right, Ishida?
Absolutely, and more learnings from other sectors, right? I mean, some sectors have been able to crack part of this problem, and I think definitely there are lessons learned, and it's important to take those lessons, like integration, right? In the automotive industry, it's a classic case of just-in-time manufacturing. And I mean, maybe supply chain, life sciences doesn't need just-in-time manufacturing, but from an availability of product, of APIs, we could get there, and that would be a game changer.
But I think things are progressing. I mean, there's tremendous advances being made. I mean, Zuellig actually has a blockchain-based information sharing system where the suppliers, the handler, are able to monitor and assure the safety of the product through the supply chain. So there are developments coming, but I totally take the point. We're at the early stages, and there's a lot further to go.
There are still certain pockets of opaqueness that the visibility is not seen. But I think you're right, Chris. We are getting there, and we are making progress day by day. But I just want to shout out that we need to continue to work on that.
There are spots of brilliance. We need to scale those up.
Yes.
And additionally, I think fully agree with you. Collaboration and data exchange is so critical. But thinking of healthcare and our medicines, which are all filed and approved by our health authorities, I really experienced many times these country-specific packaging materials. I think that would be so critical and helpful to be faster at the patient or avoid waste, write-offs, obsolescence costs as well, if there were more regional packs, artworks. So each country, as you might know that each country has its specific presentation, folding box, leaflets, all the regulation. If there is a way, especially for high-end products where the demand is really difficult to forecast, to use more, to make use of more harmonized packaging for regional, for specific countries. I know there are many countries in Asia allow these special import permits on patient basis. But I think with an open mind and closer collaboration across Asia in harmonized packaging would be so helpful for the entire supply chain and would really benefit our patients.
True.
Yeah, that's a great point, Alex. Thank you. Ishida, I want to ask just one question. We've talked about some of the supply side pressures. In particular, there were two countries who are in our regional sphere, China and India, who play a very big role in the supply chain for pharma products. And I'm wondering, what do you see as the change in their potential roles, given their established capacities in terms of production for raw materials and APIs and finished products?
That's a deep question. one that requires another discussion altogether, but I'll attempt it. China's always, for at least since I would say late 90s, known as the API capital of the world, right? And it still is. It produces probably 40 to 50% of the APIs worldwide. And India slowly earned the reputation of the vaccine capital of the world by supplying about 200 million doses of COVID vaccines just in this time. But with the geopolitical situation, as well as specific geopolitical situation between India and China, those roles have evolved a fair bit, right? So on one hand, India has basically received a lot of recognition worldwide in terms of being a supplier of most all generics, a lot of prescription drugs as well. And India did face some quality and regulatory issues in the past, but I think it sort of crossed that barrier. So most of the big Indian companies, Aurobindo, Sun Pharmaceuticals, all these have great recognition, Dr. Reddy's, globally now. But what India did differently, I think it was 2 to 3 years back, on the back of some geopolitical challenges between India and China, was to actually ramp up API production within the market. So India currently imports, there are various statistics, anything between 70 to 85% of its APIs from China. But with this focused investment from the government, India is going to reduce that import by about 35%. So imagine a country that supplies 1 in 3, I think, prescription drug in US, I think by some estimate 1 in 4 in UK, is now going to manufacture its APIs by itself. That will be a big shift in the whole API, basically the raw material market for the pharmaceutical industry. So China would still remain to be a leader, but I think that shift is slowly happening. It's actually sort of speeded up by one more factor, right? So the zero COVID tolerance policy in China did hamper production in several facilities. Now, China has over, I believe, 8,000 API manufacturing facilities. But interestingly, for some of the unique APIs, maybe not even unique APIs, they're just 1 or 2 such producers. They have the scale, so they have a massive cost advantage, 20 to 25% cheaper than the rest of the world. But if that one factory shuts down, you don't have that critical ingredient, and that impacted some high-end medicines during the COVID period.
Yes.
So with that, obviously US, European markets are also waking up to the challenge and trying to insource some of these critical APIs back home. But that journey is going to be slow. And obviously with the cost advantage that China has, it would still remain to be a leader for, I think, some time. But to your point earlier, right, Singapore is in that unique position to actually capitalize and connect the world with India, China, and the global trade, making sure that supplies are not impacted and disrupted by all the geopolitical and other challenges we are seeing around the world.
Thanks, Ishita. I think you did a great job of answering a very challenging question in the time that we have. That was
interesting
well done.
dynamics at play. I think we should ask this question again, right? Maybe 3 years' time, and maybe the answer will be very different.
Indeed. As we talk about building supply chains and right-sizing supply chains and establishing supply networks with equity and accessibility of medicines, the impact on sustainability is a key factor for us to take into account, and how we embed sustainability in processes and the partnerships that we have around the region. So we're approaching COP27, that's the climate change conference, and there are key sustainability discussions taking place around the world. So sustainability and the importance of supply chain has really never been more discussed. Alex, I'd like to maybe ask you if you think, if you look at or think about the infrastructure, the systems, technologies, processes and people, it sounds like a lot, but which support our healthcare ecosystem, the supply chain ecosystem. What are some of the key areas for focus or for building and maintaining and future fitting sustainability as a part of our supply chains?
Yes, sustainability and supply chain, they go along whenever the topic comes along, because today I don't even want to go on too much on the CO2 reduction opportunities with our transports. I'm much more into this waste elimination, where we know we have so much packaging material, which we need, but also we need these packaging materials also for the transportation of temperature-sensitive products, for example, or all our products. There are unfortunately many packaging layouts, they are just used once. And I'm a big fan of circular economy. I think reverse logistics needs to come more and more into place. But at the very beginning, I would like to have research and development of a product very closely linked also to supply chain. And with COVID, we have seen how closely they worked hand in hand, and we were able to deliver on time and the sophisticated products. And that's just an example. I want research and development working on sustainable solutions, sustainable cold chain containers, shipping boxes, which can be reused. That's really one of my key points. And I'm very, very strong on reducing waste. As I mentioned earlier, in 2017, 50% of released vaccines have been wasted, destroyed, because they had temperature deviations during the transport. And that's by far too much. And also now we hear all the different news about COVID vaccines expiring here and there. What a shame. So we need to invest much more in research and development and in data exchange, and keep up the great collaboration. We had a supply chain was always a topic. No news was always good news. And I think in the last years, it was always really well collaborated together, and we should build on that also for the future in terms of our sustainability trajectory ahead with all our supply chain colleagues. But it's many stakeholders involved here.
Brett, can I just chip in? Sorry, Christian, I just chip in one quick word. I think the part about the reusability, we also need to factor in the business model. Yeah, so if it doesn't make commercial sense to the enterprises, then I believe adoption will be slow and maybe even very difficult. So I think as we work on the technology, the R&D, which I totally agree with Alex, we also need more work on the business modeling. And that's where I think, Chris, you can come in.
Well, I actually want to emphasize the point that Alex made about waste, because she said, let's not talk about carbon footprint. And well, I actually want to talk about carbon footprint, because if you waste a product, the entire carbon footprint of the entire chain, right from the sourcing of the raw materials, through the transportation, through the manufacturing, through the distribution, through the cold storage, all of that carbon that's been generated and water that's been used and energy that's been used, it's all wasted. Yeah. So it absolutely is critically important to cut down on the waste. And quite honestly, the life sciences industry has a terrible reputation.
Yes.
And it's much worse than other industries. For the waste that's generated, for the amount of single-use plastics that go through, and of course we understand sterility is very important and has to be maintained, but there is so much more that could be done. And it comes down to supply chain. If you can get a better balance between supply and demand, then you have a very good opportunity to dramatically reduce the waste generated.
Just add a minor point to it. And I think one practical way, which I think is really could work, and I think most industries have benefited from it, is sustainable procurement, right? Something we don't talk about, that part of supply chain enough. How do we work with our suppliers to actually reduce this waste, to actually collaborate better, and make sure that we put some pressure upstream to actually design more sustainable products, to actually reduce the waste in terms of better planning, and think about more sustainable ways of transportation, because transportation will get even more interesting as telehealth and telemedicine grows, right? That's right. And that is a trend in this part of the world to achieve the access goals we have. So we need to get smarter about that too. And I think procurement would be a key solution there.
So that's one of the business model you're proposing. From the upstream, you have to impose or enforce certain type of framework or regime.
Absolutely, stick and carrot.
Yeah. Agree.
Cool.
That's a great discussion. I might just jump to one of the questions that we've had. And one of the questions is that we've seen a massive site transfer trend in the past 2 years. Would you advise if this trend will continue, until when? because the site transfer of production, sites migration, has a huge impact on local markets in terms of supply chain management. Chung, Ming, would you like to talk about that in a Singapore context? And then I might ask Ishita also to...
Maybe Ishita can go first.
I mean, I think the site transfers happened, and I believe you mean site transfer of stock from the question, happened because of these demand and supply disruptions we had, right? So if that happens to cater to the patient-centric nature of the industry, I think those things are likely, but I think definitely something that as an industry we should focus on to not promulgate, right? Because to your point earlier, we need to plan for demand fluctuations better. We need to know where to hold stocks. We need to set up RDC solutions which help to resolve some of these situations, not earmark inventory, because I mean in ASEAN we need to have new inserts and packaging and all that. So I think there are lots of tactical solutions there that most of the RDCs cater to, and I think that can help to reduce requirement for site transfers. But I think it's hard to eliminate until we really up our game on data, visibility, track and trace, and then sort of solve the problem in a more long-term basis and actually create more opportunities along the way.
Yeah.
So just to add on, Brett, I think one of the important things is we need to harmonize the supply chain across the different countries. And that means that not only you work within the country or the market, but across markets and jurisdiction, we need to work together. Currently, I believe that every country imposes very strict regime on healthcare and life sciences, and I believe not all of them are completely the same. I think, Chris, you will know that very well. Yeah, even the simple act of registration for a new product could vary across the markets. I think more work needs to be done at either the international, at the regional level, working with the governments and the industry together to do this. And then we can truly have an efficient, equitable, and a very optimized supply chain for life sciences.
I think that's a great comment, and actually in one of the sessions this morning there was quite a bit of discussion about the regulatory frameworks across the different markets and the lack of harmonisation that's really impacting registration of products, but it also impacts quite heavily on the availability of infrastructure and the way that we operate the supply chains in our markets. Alex, from the perspective of a multinational manufacturer, how have you seen, relocation of production sites and site transfers, knowledge transfers?
Yeah, I think the trend will go on, and it clearly depends on the interest of local governments and support on that. But I think the bigger question is, where's the demand? To bring a manufacturing site to a location where the demand is bigger, where we have the visibility. It's quite complex, especially if we think now of these biologicals or these new innovative products. They are very costly to really transfer. And I think and also we have spoken about sourcing around that. There's much more to that. And tech transfers, as per my own experience, can take years really to go through. And if you do it for one product, you have still so many other products to transfer, or whatever you choose to transfer to. So I think the trend will go on, and I think it's nice to onshore also local production capacities, but it's much more behind there. You need the capabilities, capacities, but also all the sourcing around that, and make a well thought through choice which products to transfer at the end.
Thanks, Alex. That was tremendous feedback. We still have time for one more question? No? One more. Okay. Very good. Just very quickly, we talked about innovative products and biologicals that we just touched on also then. Cell and gene therapies, how do we see the entry of those into this particular region, manufacturing capabilities, establishing the required supply chain capabilities?
Well, it has a huge potential for not only benefits to patients, but the massive implications for the supply chain. When you have tailored regimes and tailored therapies to individuals based on their cells or their DNA, you have to move the manufacturing location much closer to the end patient, because that is very important to get the response times down. But that has to be managed in areas where they have the capability and the infrastructure to do it. Singapore is a natural location to do it, where there's a good knowledge base, there's a good infrastructure. There are already many small enterprises setting this up. But ultimately, it's going to be close to the patient, and then the supply chain job becomes one of managing the stock of the reagents and to be able to respond very, very rapidly to the patient care needs, to receive those biological materials hassle-free, get them in, get the production done, and get it out as soon as possible. So we need automation in the manufacturing process, and we need all the care that needs to go on in handling the products, both inbound and outbound. So there's a huge implication for the way the supply chains will be structured and the way they will respond.
Yeah. I think today we are at the rising trend of these gene therapies and a new form of treatment. The scale is still not that big, but I suppose if the industry really move very rapidly on that, the supply chain capabilities and the solutioning have to catch up with that. Right. And I think that will require, again, new ideas, new form of research and development into the technology. Today, for clinical trials, we are moving, a lot can be done by human couriers or some other forms of modality. But when you have at scale, then like what Chris said, you need to really invest into a new form of, the technology and the solutioning. And that will require more work to work together. And that means that you also have the cross-border and the jurisdiction issue at play again. Yeah.
And I think key part is going to be talent, because I think that's one gap we see in the region, both from manufacturers, technology suppliers, automation providers, as well as supply chain professionals who can manage the complexity of these innovative products.
Fantastic. I think on that note, we've run out of time, and I'd really like to thank my fellow panelists, Chris, Chung, Ming, Ishita, Alex. Thank you very much for the valuable contributions that you've made this afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting discussion.